The sequence of returns risk. One of the biggest risks to your retirement that's lurking out there, and I'm guessing you've probably never heard of it. You're not alone, because many advisors that I work with and coach throughout the country also, and other professionals, are also unaware of what the sequence of returns risk is. And that, next to taxes, I think may be the single largest risk in retirement. And so today we want to spend a little bit of time talking about what the sequence of returns risk is and how it may affect you going forward, and hopefully give you some guidance as to what types of things you want to be looking for to mitigate some of that risk in your retirement. So what I want to do is I want to share my screen with you, give you a quick rundown of what it actually is and how it can impact you going forward. And I want to start with what actually is the sequence of returns risk. And it's exactly what it sounds like. The sequence in which the returns on your assets come, right? Do you have good returns? Do you have bad returns? And in what order do they come? But before we can actually talk about sequence of returns risk, we got to understand why it's important. And so the money cycle is something that everybody goes through, right? We have the three phases. There's the accumulation phase, there's the preservation phase, and then the distribution phase. The accumulation phase is when we're young and we're working, we're saving for retirement, right? We're trying to get as much money as we can and grow our assets as much as possible so that we can retire one day. Then there's what we call the preservation phase, which is that 5 to 10 year window before we retire, where we want to start to take some of those assets that we've been saving all our lives and kind of protect them. And then there's ultimately the distribution phase, which is where we start to live off of those assets we've saved, right? You have this big 401k. Now we're going to start to take money out of that account so that we can live on it and do the things we want to do in retirement. Unfortunately, most Americans go directly from accumulation right into distribution, and they never think about creating that preservation phase. And so you've probably remember the stories from back in 2008 when, or even in 2020, or even in 2022, when people were getting ready to retire, and the day they went to hand in their papers, their accounts were down 40, 30, 40, 50%. And they just no longer had enough money to retire. So they had one of two options: live a different lifestyle than they had expected, or keep on working. And had they just created that preservation phase, then they would have been able to retire on time and do the things that they wanted to do. So the sequence of returns is exactly as it sounds, the sequence in which those returns come inside of your portfolio. So I want to talk about the accumulation phase first, which is while we're still working and saving. And to keep things simple, we're going to talk about a $100,000 portfolio. We average 6% return. We're not taking any withdrawals, and we're also not putting any money in. So this first person we're going to talk about, I call her Ms. Happy. She starts out with a great sequence of returns. Up front, she has positive 30, positive 20% returns on her portfolio. Then she has 6 years of 10% growth. She ends with terrible returns on the back end. She's down 20 and 30. You can see at the end of a 10-year period, she's still ahead by more than 50%. She's got $154,000 in her account. That's pretty good, right? Mr. Unhappy, during the same accumulation phase, the same portfolio, he starts out with the terrible returns. So a negative sequence of returns, negative 30, negative 20. Then he has that positive 6% growth for 10% growth for 6 years, excuse me. And then he ends with the great returns on the back end. And as you can see, because he's not taking any money out of the portfolio, they actually end up in the exact same space. So while you're in that accumulation phase, the sequence of returns really has no impact on your accounts. But the moment you are in that distribution phase and you start living on your assets, it can have a drastic change. Again, this is the same $100,000 portfolio, the same average 6% return, but now you're going to take $6,000 a year out to supplement your income, right? Things like a pension or Social Security, whatever other assets you have coming in, we're now going to supplement that with a withdrawal from your account. Ms. Happy again starts out with great returns up front. She ends with terrible returns on the back end. You can see after that 10-year period, she's withdrawn $60,000 of income. She's still ahead of where she started at $105,000. I think that's a pretty great outcome and a really good sequence of returns. For Mr. Unhappy, You can see again, the same 100,000, same average 6% and the same annual withdrawal. At the end of his same 10-year period, having that negative sequence of returns, he ends up with less than $39,000 in his portfolio. And you might be asking why. So if you looked at the end of year one, he's down 30%. He now has a $70,000 portfolio. He has to withdraw $6,000 to pay for his bills, right? Because the dollars that we need don't change. So that same $6,000 now becomes an 8.5% of his 8.5% withdrawal of his portfolio. After year two, he now has $51,000 when he takes his $6,000 withdrawal. And you can see that's over 11% withdrawal from his portfolio. So just after 2 years, he's got less than half of what he started with. And if I were to ask you, how much does your account need to grow in order to make up a 50% loss? You might say it needs to grow 50%, but the truth is it needs to grow 100%. You have to double your account. And unfortunately for Mr. Unhappy, he just never had a chance to grow his account back because there wasn't enough in there, even with these tremendous growth rates, to actually make up for that initial loss. And so the sequence of returns and not creating that preservation stage can have a massive impact on your retirement. And it's one of the biggest risks standing out there that I don't believe a lot of people understand. That's why we believe in a bucketing strategy, the now, the soon, and the later bucket. And so basically your now bucket will just be the monies that you need in the next 12 months, any big expenses and your emergency number. Then we have a soon bucket, which buys us a window for the first couple of years of your retirement to protect us against a negative sequence of returns. And then I also like to build out that later bucket, which is where we allow for that long-term growth to keep up with things like inflation and then also legacy planning along the way. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. And that is why we believe the sequence of returns risk is one of the biggest risks to your retirement. And we want to make sure that we help you protect it as much as possible.